Imagine standing on a remote island in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by nothing but wild ocean and howling winds. The ground beneath your feet was born from fire and fury, shaped by forces so powerful they could move mountains. This is the story of Mount Gilbert, a sleeping giant that sits quietly on one of Alaska's most mysterious islands. Deep in the eastern Aleutian Islands, where the Pacific Ocean crashes endlessly against volcanic shores, there's a place that few people will ever see. Akun Island stretches across 64 square miles of rugged wilderness, and rising from its northern half is Mount Gilbert, a volcano that has been sleeping for decades but whose story spans millions of years. The Aleutian Islands themselves are like stepping stones across the northern Pacific, stretching over 1,200 miles from Alaska toward Russia. These islands form what scientists call the Pacific Ring of Fire, a massive circle of active volcanoes that rings the entire Pacific Ocean. Mount Gilbert is just one small piece of this incredible puzzle, but its story helps us understand how our planet works deep beneath the surface. To understand Mount Gilbert, we need to travel back in time, way back to when these islands first began to form. About 55 million years ago, something incredible was happening beneath the ocean floor. The Pacific Plate, a massive chunk of the Earth's crust, was slowly sliding underneath the North American plate. When this happens, scientists call it subduction, and it's one of the most powerful forces on our planet. Picture two enormous puzzle pieces trying to fit together, but one has to slide under the other. As the Pacific Plate dove deeper into the Earth, it got hotter and hotter until parts of it actually melted. This melted rock, called magma, was lighter than the solid rock around it, so it began to rise like a bubble in a thick soup. When this magma finally reached the surface, it exploded out as lava, building up layer by layer to create the Aleutian Islands. Mount Gilbert was born from this same process. Standing at 2,684 feet tall, it may not seem like a giant compared to other mountains, but remember that it rises from the ocean floor, making it much taller than it appears. The mountain forms the entire northern part of Akun Island, which means that a huge chunk of this island is actually one big volcano. Unlike the towering snow-capped peaks we might imagine when we think of mountains, Mount Gilbert looks quite different. Years of harsh weather have worn away much of its original shape. The northern side of the mountain drops off steeply, carved away by thousands of years of pounding ocean waves. Scientists believe that the original summit was actually much higher and located further north than where the current peak sits today. The ocean has literally eaten away parts of this ancient volcano. The southern side of Mount Gilbert tells a different story. Here, the slopes are gentler and less damaged by erosion. This gives us clues about how the mountain formed and how wind and water have shaped it over time. It's like reading a book written in stone, where each layer and each carved valley tells us something about the past. One of the most fascinating things about Mount Gilbert is what happened in the early 1900s. About 1.5 miles northeast of the summit, something amazing was discovered. The ground in this area was different from the rest of the island. It was discolored and altered, changed by intense heat and chemical reactions. Steam was rising from cracks in the earth, creating visible plumes that could be seen from far away. These steam vents, called fumaroles, were proof that Mount Gilbert was not completely dead. Deep underground, the volcano was still warm, still active in its own quiet way. Hot gases and steam were finding their way to the surface through cracks in the rock. For people visiting the island in those days, it must have been both beautiful and a little scary to see steam rising from the earth like breath on a cold day. The altered ground around these steam vents covers an area of about 20,000 square meters. That's roughly the size of 3 football fields. The heat and chemicals from deep inside the earth had changed the very rocks themselves, turning them different colors and creating new minerals. It was like a natural chemistry lab operating right at the surface. This discovery of hot springs and steam vents was so exciting that in the 1920s, people actually tried to mine sulfur from this area. Sulfur is a yellow chemical element that forms around volcanic activity, and it was valuable for making things like gunpowder and medicines. Unfortunately for the miners, there wasn't enough sulfur to make the operation profitable, especially in such a remote and difficult location. The mining attempt failed, but it shows us how people have always been fascinated by volcanic activity. Something interesting happened to Mount Gilbert's steam vents between 1942 and 1945. The fumaroles that had been active for decades suddenly stopped producing steam. Scientists noticed this change during World War II, when military personnel were stationed throughout the Aleutian Islands. By 1948, all the steam activity had completely ceased. Mount Gilbert had grown even quieter than before. This change tells us something important about how volcanoes work. They're not like light switches that are either on or off. Instead, they're more like dimmer switches, with activity that can increase or decrease gradually over time. The fact that Mount Gilbert's steam vents shut down doesn't mean the volcano is completely dead forever. It just means that for now, the heat source deep underground has cooled down or found a different path to the surface. The location of Mount Gilbert makes it part of a much larger story about how our planet works. The Aleutian Islands sit right on the boundary between two massive pieces of the Earth's crust. This boundary is incredibly active, with earthquakes and volcanic eruptions happening regularly. On average, one major earthquake with a magnitude of 8 or higher occurs every 13 years in this region. Smaller but still powerful earthquakes happen about 6 times per year. Mount Gilbert sits in the eastern part of the Aleutian chain, in a group called the Fox Islands. These islands include some of the most famous volcanoes in Alaska, including Mount Shishelden on nearby Uninhabited Island, which is still very active today. The Fox Islands are like a family of volcanoes, all born from the same geological processes but each with its own personality and history. Akun Island itself is a fascinating place that few people ever get to see. The island is about 14 miles long and 11 miles wide, making it roughly the size of a small city. But unlike a city, Akun Island has no permanent human residents. The only people who live there temporarily are a few workers who maintain the airport and some folks who look after a small herd of cattle that roam freely across the island. The cattle on Akun Island have an interesting story of their own. They were brought to the island years ago and have adapted to life in this harsh environment. There are also 3 horses that live on the island, creating a unique situation where domestic animals live wild in one of the most remote places in North America. The weather on Akun Island and around Mount Gilbert is what scientists call oceanic climate. This means the temperature doesn't change dramatically between seasons, but the weather is almost always challenging. Heavy rainfall, strong winds, and thick fog are normal throughout the year. In winter, temperatures average around -4 degrees Fahrenheit, while summer temperatures rarely get above 55 degrees. The fog is so persistent that clear days are actually unusual events. This harsh climate has shaped not just the mountain itself, but all life on the island. Plants that grow here have to be tough enough to survive constant wind and salt spray from the ocean. Most of the island is covered with hardy grasses and small flowering plants that stay low to the ground to avoid the worst of the wind. The geological story of Mount Gilbert extends far beyond just the mountain itself. The rocks that make up Akun Island are primarily basalt, a dark volcanic rock that forms when lava cools quickly. Some parts of the island feature spectacular columnar basalt formations, where the cooling lava cracked into geometric columns that look almost like they were carved by hand. These columns can be up to 200 feet tall and 10 feet wide, creating natural sculptures that are both beautiful and scientifically important. What makes Mount Gilbert particularly interesting to scientists is how deeply it has been eroded. Most young volcanoes have sharp, pointed peaks and steep sides. But Mount Gilbert has been worn down by millions of years of weather, giving scientists clues about how old it is and how the climate has changed over time. The fact that glaciers once covered parts of the mountain tells us that the climate was much colder in the past. Scientists have found evidence that glacial ice once flowed over the area where the fumaroles were active. This creates an interesting puzzle. How can you have hot steam vents in the same place where glaciers once existed? The answer lies in the changing climate and the long timeline of volcanic activity. When the Earth was colder during ice ages, glaciers covered much of Alaska. Later, as the climate warmed, the ice melted away, and volcanic activity became more visible at the surface. The broader Aleutian volcanic arc, of which Mount Gilbert is a part, contains 57 known volcanoes. Some of these are very active, with eruptions happening regularly. Others, like Mount Gilbert, are quiet now but could potentially become active again in the future. Scientists keep track of all these volcanoes through the Alaska Volcano Observatory, which monitors earthquake activity, gas emissions, and other signs that might indicate increasing volcanic activity. The story of Mount Gilbert is also the story of the people who have lived in this region for thousands of years. The Aleut people, who call themselves Unangan, have lived on these islands for at least 9,000 years. They developed incredible skills for surviving in this harsh environment, building communities that thrived despite the challenging conditions. The Aleph people understood these islands and their volcanoes in ways that modern science is still learning to appreciate. They knew which areas were safe and which were dangerous. They could read the signs in the landscape that told them about volcanic activity and changing weather patterns. Their knowledge was built over countless generations of careful observation and hard-won experience. Unfortunately, the arrival of Russian fur hunters in 1741 marked the beginning of a tragic period for the Aleph people. Within 90 years, their population dropped from an estimated 25,000 people to fewer than 1,000. Disease, violence, and forced relocation devastated their communities. Today, Aleph villages exist on only a few of the islands, though their cultural knowledge and traditions continue to be preserved and celebrated. During World War II, the Aleutian Islands became a battlefield when Japanese forces invaded Attu and Kiska Islands. American military forces built bases throughout the island chain, including facilities near Mount Gilbert. The war brought thousands of people to these remote islands for the first time, and military personnel made many of the scientific observations about volcanic activity that we still rely on today. The legacy of World War II can still be seen throughout the Aleutian Islands. Old military buildings, abandoned airfields, and even unexploded ordnance remain scattered across many islands. These remnants serve as reminders of how global conflicts can reach even the most remote corners of the Earth. Today, Mount Gilbert represents both the power of geological forces and the importance of scientific monitoring. While the mountain appears quiet now, scientists know that volcanoes can remain dormant for decades or even centuries before becoming active again. The Global Volcanism Program, which tracks volcanic activity worldwide, lists Mount Gilbert as a volcano with no known eruptions in the past 12,000 years, but this doesn't mean it will never erupt again. Modern technology allows scientists to monitor volcanoes like Mount Gilbert in ways that were impossible just a few decades ago. Satellite images can detect tiny changes in the shape of the mountain that might indicate magma moving underground. Sensitive earthquake monitors can pick up tremors so small that people can't feel them. Gas sensors can detect chemical changes that might signal increasing volcanic activity. The study of Mount Gilbert and other Aleutian volcanoes helps scientists understand not just these specific mountains, but volcanic processes around the world. The subduction zone that created the Aleutian Islands is similar to zones that exist near Japan, Indonesia, and the west coast of South America. By studying how volcanoes work in Alaska, scientists can better predict and prepare for volcanic activity in other parts of the world. Mount Gilbert stands as a reminder of the incredible forces that shape our planet. From its birth in the collision of tectonic plates to its current quiet state, this mountain tells a story that spans millions of years. It reminds us that the earth beneath our feet is not solid and unchanging, but dynamic and alive with geological processes that continue to this day. The sleeping giant of Akun Island may be quiet now, but its story is far from over. Deep beneath Mount Gilbert, the same forces that built the mountain continue to operate. Magma still moves through the Earth's crust. Tectonic plates still push against each other with incredible force. And somewhere in the future, Mount Gilbert may wake up once again, adding new chapters to its already amazing story. For now, Mount Gilbert waits in the fog and wind of the North Pacific, a testament to the power of volcanic forces and a reminder that our planet is always changing, always growing, always creating new wonders for us to discover and understand. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe, and don't forget to explore more geological wonders on our channel.